Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Libya's Transitional Council struggles to end clashes between rival militias. Bahraini activists' life in danger after 55 days of hunger strike. And France expels 5 Imams after Merah killings. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East, begins now.
Our Al Jazeera correspondent in Libya confirmed that 14 people were killed and 80 others were injured in clashes between armed groups in the western Libyan city of Zuwara. The shelling between armed groups in the western cities of Zuwara and Rakhdalin was renewed for the third consecutive day. They used mortars and anti-aircraft missiles. This comes after a border guard unit was kidnapped by gunmen from the city of Al-Jamil.
After the Sabha crisis, the clashes this time are in western Libya. They started after a border guard unit was kidnapped by armed men from the city of Jamil, an incident with conflicting narratives. Some believe this operation is the result of the tension between different tribes in Libya, while others assure that Zuwara's rebels entered into an area they had agreed not to go into.
The Defense Ministry assigned us to be border guards. We represent the state. We didn't assign ourselves.
We have no doubt they are rebels. They are the rebels of Zuwara. But on their way back to Nalut, they attacked some people in an area called Bishul in the southern part of Al-Jamil.
In the second scene of this story, these conditions lead to other discussions. The residents of Zuwara say it is oil that is fueling their conflict with their neighbors. They believe stability will not be achieved unless wanted men are handed over, and the damage they endured during Gaddafi's rule is redressed. They say Gaddafi deprived them of their historical rights and seized their land.
These are all the conditions of the February 17th rebels in Libya. As we mentioned in these 4 points, we do not retreat from these demands, and they are considered a red line for the February 17th rebels.
The demands reached the transitional government that rushed to Zuwara to calm the situation, hoping to win some time to solve these crises. Crises that are placing doubt on the government's ability to carry Libya to safe shores.
The ceasefire we agreed to is the beginning, and this ceasefire will not be maintained unless we deal with the reasons behind the clashes.
All parties admit the ceasefire is fragile and requires more concessions. Some say the current situation in Libya is not helpful to reaching a compromise.
Several demonstrators were injured after regime forces cracked down on protests across various Bahraini regions. Meanwhile, the February 14th coalition announced the launch of a new week of popular mobilization under the slogan, "Freedom or Martyrdom." The coalition called for demonstrators to express loyalty to the prisoners and the movement's figures.
These Bahraini protesters took to the street in the Barba region to affirm their rejection of the Saudi occupation of their country. The demonstrators also condemned the regime's complicity in the occupation's crackdown on civilians. Residents of the town of Shahra Khan held peaceful demonstrations in solidarity with the martyrs of the Bahraini Revolution, vowing to press ahead with the revolution's demands and honor the victims killed by the Saudi-backed Bahraini forces. Residents in the Sindh region also held demonstrations to express loyalty to journalist Ahmed Ismail, who was martyred by the gunfire of the regime's forces. These masses chanted slogans demanding the expulsion of the occupation and the downfall of the regime. In response, regime forces fired live ammunition and tear gas at the peaceful demonstrators in an attempt to disperse them, injuring one protester. They also attempted to run over several demonstrators. The scene was not much different in the Samahij region, where regime forces confronted civilian youths taking part in a demonstration held in solidarity with martyr Ahmed Ismail. The regime forces opened fire at the rally, injuring several protesters. In the town of Salamabad, regime forces attacked a sit-in held in solidarity with the family of martyr Ahmed. The regime continues to refuse to release Ahmed's body to his family, even though he passed away 3 days ago. In solidarity with prominent activist Abdul Hadi al-Khawaja and martyr Ahmed Ismail, residents of Musala, Jedhafs, and other regions took to the street. The demonstrators raised slogans affirming their loyalty to the symbols of the Bahraini Revolution. In Al-Manama, representatives of the International Labor Organization and sacked employees from the Bahrain aluminum company, Alba, held a demonstration in front of the Ministry of Labor demanding the authorities fulfill their promise to reinstate them to their jobs. The employees were sacked after participating in peaceful demonstrations. The employees accused the company of adopting an arbitrary dismissal policy, citing that 44 workers had been sacked in the past 2 days. Meanwhile, the February 14th coalition in Bahrain announced the launch of the Week of Freedom, or Martyrdom. The coalition called on demonstrators to express loyalty to Bahraini prisoners and the movement's figures. They also called for continuing their campaign, dubbed Mosques Belong to God, by reconstructing all mosques demolished by the regime and the Saudi occupation.
The lawyer of Bahraini activist and hunger striker, Abdelhadi al-Khawaja, said his client was taken to the hospital after his health deteriorated in prison. In a phone call with Al-Alam, attorney Al-Jashi said that al-Khawaja is determined to continue his hunger strike, as well as continuing to refuse taking his anti-diabetic medication in protest of the regime's crackdown policies.
The incidents in the French city of Toulouse led the French Interior Ministry to take new measures, the latest of which was the decision to expel 5 imams from its territory, saying it is concerned about its national security. An Algerian Islamist and a Malian imam were indeed deported, while another 3 imams will soon be deported. The procedure was preceded by a series of arrests affecting 20 people. Mohamed Wamoussi reports from Paris.
Mohamed Merah, the alleged killer behind the Toulouse attack, was killed by police, embarrassing France. After an arrest campaign targeting radical Islamists, the French authorities resorted to a policy of arbitrary expulsion. Deportation decrees have been issued to 5 imams, while 5 others remain on a temporary list, in a show of power by Sarkozy before the presidential elections.
We have specific questions that we will ask some people, and what happened with the detainees and the expelled will continue. There will be other operations that will enable us to expel some of them, those we do not need, from our country.
The arrests targeted 20 people, among them Mohamed al-Shamlan, the leader of the Knights of Glory Salafi Society, who is accused of plotting the kidnapping of a Jewish judge in Lyon. Al-Shamlan, who is French, as is his mother, was a nuisance for the authorities because of his recurring appearances on the streets of Paris and his calls for a caliphate.
We are now investigating with the leader of the group, Mohamed al-Shamlan, and like the rest of the detainees, he is denying any responsibility and claiming he is not guilty.
The inflated Islamophobia campaign in media outlets, along with its implications of hostility and vigilance after the Toulouse attack, made every Muslim in France susceptible to allegations or suspicions to the extent that Muslims may be removed from the French social composition.
Today, we Muslims are scared and we feel as though we're being threatened and cannot live in security and peace. This is a problem that will obstruct the Muslim community's assimilation, a community that is required to go beyond its duties.
منذ تفجر قضية محمد مراح والشرطة الفرنسية تعكف على رصد تحركات المساجد.
The Mohamed Merah case led French police to monitor the mosque's sermons, and every time the alert level rises, preachers stick to sermons about religious rituals, so it can't be said their speeches are provocative or inconsistent with the values of the Republic. Mohamed Wamoussi, Dubai TV, Paris.
With attacks and counterattacks, battles erupted in southern Yemen today. Sources in Abyan province announced that 38 al-Qaeda members were killed in the shelling and air raids carried out by the Yemeni army on al-Harra region by the border between the provinces of Abyan and Lahej. A military source said the Yemeni forces launched extensive air raids and artillery shelling on the border area between Abyan and Lahej, indicating the airstrikes were carried out by the Yemeni Air Force with the assistance of the US. The al-Qaeda organization in southern Yemen had taken control of the region that was shelled on Saturday after battles with the Yemeni army led to dozens of deaths and injuries.
Qatar has rejected Iraq's demand to extradite Iraqi fugitive Vice President Tariq al-Hashimi. The Qatari Minister of Foreign Affairs, Khalid al-Attiyah, says diplomatic norms and the post of Hashimi prevent Qatar from doing so. Baghdad wants Doha to hand Hashimi over as soon as possible. Following his escape from Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan region on Sunday, Hashimi held talks with Qatar's Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani. He flew to Qatar at the invitation of the Emir. The Iraqi vice president is accused of involvement in at least 150 terrorist operations by running a death squad. In December, judicial authorities issued an arrest warrant against him. Hashimi fled from Baghdad and sought refuge in the Kurdistan region. Kurdish officials, had refused to hand him over to Baghdad. An opposition group in Turkey has criticized the government of Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan for its decision to cut oil imports from Iran. The Great Union Party, the BBP, demands an explanation from the government. BBP has also filed a lawsuit at the Council of State, the highest administrative court in Turkey, over the issue. It blames the recent hikes in fuel prices in Turkey on the government's decision to cut oil imports from Iran.
The U.S. ambassador to Turkey has asked why Turkey does not implement these sanctions against Iran. Just one day later, Turkey implemented the sanctions, and on the same day the price hikes were imposed on the Turkish nation.
The Turkish officials have made the decision under pressure from the US. Washington has also put pressure on other countries, including India and China, to stop buying oil from Iran, but the two have rejected to do so. Iran's navy has captured a group of pirates who were trying to confiscate a vessel carrying cargo from the Horn of Africa to Iran's port of Bandar Abbas. Amir Hossein Eskandar tells us more.
Thousands of Iranian Navy men in the Indian Ocean. Commander of Iran's Navy says currently there are over 11,000 Navy men in the Indian Ocean to counter piracy attacks.
Last year, only 44 piracy battles occurred, and we escorted 1,500 vessels safely. We currently have 19 Navy vessels with about 500 to 600 sailors on board each vessel.
Admiral Habibullah Sayyari also told Press TV Iran currently has 19 defense Navy vessels in the Indian Ocean and has received the coveted Strategic Defense Award by the International Maritime Organization, or the IMO.
One of the first countries that was available to be in the Aden Sea was Iran, and as a result received the recognition from the IMO.
According to the Admiral, in the past 3 years, Iran has escorted over 1,500 ships safely in the Indian Ocean and has reduced the fighting with pirates from 100 to 44.
We first want to make sure that our Navy fleet is in standards with the rest of the world. Let me explain: if your naval equipment does not meet world standards and is not of the latest version, you are not even allowed in the free waters of the Mediterranean.
Admiral Sayyari explained the latest incident occurred while a ship carrying cargo from Horn of Africa to port of Bandar Abbas in southern Iran was captured by pirates in the Gulf of Aden. The ship was 230 meters long and carrying tens of thousands of different merchandises. Iran's Navy fought for 36 hours and on March 31st freed the ship from the pirates.
After 36 hours of rigorous fighting, Iran's Navy captured the vessel and 13 pirates on board, freed the other vessel, and put en route back to Iran's port of Bandar Abbas.
1/3 of the world's imports and exports are done through the Indian Ocean, and there are currently 35 countries that are coasting their Navy vessels in this region. Iran's Navy has made great achievements in the past 3 years. Today, Iran is self-sufficient in manufacturing its naval products. Iran does not need the assistance of any outside states to produce its naval apparatus because of its potential of its young experts and scientists.
The Syrian Revolution's General Commission said 27 people were killed in Syria today, most of them in Idlib province. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights confirmed that clashes, raids, arrest campaigns, and the shelling continued in a number of Syrian areas. The province of Darā witnessed unprecedented clashes as the Free Syrian Army escalated its operations against the regime's army. Clashes broke out this morning between regime forces and armed groups of defectors in the countryside of Damascus. This comes as Damascus agreed to receive the UN delegation of observers and allowed the Red Cross to distribute humanitarian aid in the disaster-stricken areas.
Even though Damascus agreed to receive a UN delegation, its forces continued their military operations, particularly in the regions of Homs, Idlib, Damascus, and Darā. Violent confrontations are ongoing in these regions between the regime's army and members of the Free Syrian Army. Damascus, which agreed to Annan's plan, says what it refers to as armed terrorist groups are militarily superior to its army, and that the regime is attempting to eliminate these groups to restore security and stability to the country.
In the regions where gunmen are present, we know they have weapons that are superior to those of the Syrian army. And we saw that on Syrian TV. Some areas, like Baba Amr, are now witnessing the army's withdrawal. Other regions are also seeing the army's withdrawal, including some areas in the countryside of Darā and the countryside of Damascus.
I believe spokesman Shahada said there are ongoing withdrawals, but the military operations are still ongoing in the city of Homs. There is also shelling in al-Bayada and heavy machine gun fire in Dir Balba. In Darā, there are military operations in Da'il and other areas. Burning houses has now become a widely used practice in Syria.
Politically, Damascus received the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Jacob Kellenberger, to discuss delivering humanitarian aid to the disaster-stricken areas after reports indicated a humanitarian catastrophe is looming in these regions. Human rights advocates and observers of Syrian affairs welcome the decision and the approval of the Annan plan, demanding that all parties cooperate to implement it.
The regime and some opposition figures should not fight the Kofi Annan plan. The Kofi Annan plan can transform Syria into a democratic country through peaceful means.
Clashes, bombardments, raids, and arrests continued as the regime deployed additional forces to al-Zabadani in the countryside of Damascus, which saw fierce clashes this morning. Activists say the Da'il area of Darā is witnessing an unprecedented escalation of military operations.
Information was leaked that the regime's army is determined to storm the area and eliminate the Free Syrian Army. It is being said that they will accomplish that goal with chemical weapons. This is the news we received.
The shelling continued in Idlib province, leading to the death of civilians and members of the regime army and the Free Army. In addition, activists say the regime's army continues to burn houses. According to activists, the army's raids, arrest campaigns, and destruction of homes continue in the province of Hama. As for Homs, where at least 5 civilians were killed, the shelling continued in the neighborhoods of al-Bayada, al-Khalidiyya, and Dir Balba.
They are shelling us with mortar shells, RPG rockets, and mortars, and missiles.
The city of Rastan in Idlib province also endured fierce shelling. Developments continue on the ground, awaiting the implementation of the ceasefire plan. However, the protesting street continues its peaceful demonstrations, demanding the downfall of the regime. At the same time, the regime continues to carry out arbitrary arrests and repress peaceful protests. Hayan Yaqub, BBC.
other news, an assessment from senior military officials has concluded that 300 or fewer Israelis would be killed in a potential Iranian attack against the country. This calculation was presented to the Security Cabinet during a discussion reportedly centering on possible retaliation for Israeli strikes against Iran's nuclear installations. A top Air Force official told the ministers that if Israel's home front is targeted by Iran, it would likely last for 3 weeks and consist of a series of missile attacks from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Syria's army, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and terrorist factions in the Gaza Strip. According to Defense Ministry officials, such a situation would be tenable if all emergency command centers operate as expected. Despite that assessment, recent surveys reveal that almost 1 out of every 4 Israelis lacks immediate access to a bomb shelter. In other regional news, a senior U.S. leader is expressing concern over the future of $1.5 billion of annual military aid that the United States gives to Egypt. A U.S. congressional delegation has arrived in Cairo to gather information on the overall situation in the politically unstable landscape and to meet with the recently nominated Muslim Brotherhood presidential candidate, Khairat el-Shater, as well as Egyptian parliamentary members. Representative David Dreyer of California reiterated that Cairo's failure to meet pro-democracy goals may jeopardize continued U.S. financial assistance. At this hour, the fate of the disputed house in Hebron, inhabited by dozens of Israeli settlers since last week, remains unclear. While the deadline set by Defense Minister Ehud Barak for the settlers to evacuate the premises expired 2 hours ago, the issue was temporarily put on hold until later this evening when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is slated to convene a special ministerial meeting on the matter. Joining me now in the studio with the details is IBA's Eli Wogelenter. Eli?
Yes, Aaron, the settlers inside Beit HaMachpelah, which stands near the Cave of the Patriarchs, had been preparing all day for the IDF to use force to oust them from the building, following an order from Defense Minister Ehud Barak that the building must be evacuated by 3 p.m. Earlier today, Transportation Minister Yisrael Katz visited the controversial building to participate in a ceremony attaching a mezuzah to the doorpost. Affixing a mezuzah is a traditional Jewish ceremony that marks the start of residence in a new home. Katz told reporters that Jews have the right to buy property anywhere in the world, and in Hebron in particular. The government should be supporting the settlers in the continued Jewish settlement of Hebron. Several Likud ministers criticized the order from Barak, saying it was premature, as it preempted a ministerial discussion of the matter. Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Barak last night to allow the settlers to exhaust all legal avenues before the military carried out the eviction. Contention over the house has spread to the political arena, with right-wing ministers and MKs attacking Barak for acting independently of government policy in supporting the evacuation. Likud MK Tzipi Chotovely arrived at the home today and declared, "It is clear there will be no expulsion. Jews must continue to live here, and whoever thinks differently is anti-Semitic, and nothing less than that." Meret's party leader Zahava Gal'on criticized Netanyahu for giving in to extreme right-wing ministers and said that the settlers only managed to obtain the empty building because local Palestinians have been driven from the area. 15 Israeli families entered the empty 3-story house located next to the cave last Wednesday in an attempt to cement claims of ownership on the property. The settlers claim they purchased it legally from a Palestinian owner, while the Palestinians are challenging that claim. Netanyahu and Barak are scheduled to hold a meeting along with Vice Prime Minister Moshe Ya'alon and representatives from the civil administration and the defense ministry, immediately following a news conference be given at this hour by the Prime Minister. Netanyahu is summing up his 3rd year as head of the government.
The policy of exile adopted by the occupation authorities against prisoners is causing great concern among different official and popular organizations. The policy is viewed as unjust and a violation of international law.
Once again, the Israeli occupation shows complete disregard for international law by exiling prisoner Hana al-Shalabi after she waged a 43-day open-ended hunger strike in protest of administrative detention. With this move, Israel sent a clear message to the world that it pays no attention to international law.
The occupation's policy is to expel the Palestinians, to displace them, and move them from their place of residence. And this policy is constant and ongoing. It's a breach of Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention. It's also considered a war crime. We have expressed our views in this matter and continue to do so. But the occupation's authorities have not changed this policy because the international community lacks the political will to solve this issue.
However, it has recently become clear, especially after the most recent prisoner swap deal, that the occupation is adopting a new policy targeting the prisoners in general and freed prisoners in particular. This policy includes a wave of retaliatory measures such as administrative detentions, summons, threats and intimidation, and reaching their peak with the policy of exile.
Our sister Egypt, that stopped implementing the articles of this agreement, should really follow up on what is happening to our prisoners. It should also put an end to the occupation government's ongoing policy of arresting freed prisoners and sending them back to prison.
These Israeli violations only form one chapter in a series of the occupation that singles out prisoners and breaches the Geneva Conventions as the world simply watches. The occupation's violation of the rights of prisoners is not a new development. However, many are concerned that prisoners will become the target of a number of policies, notably the policy of exile, policies that become the occupation's permanent approach toward many prisoners.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wyncote Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.